A waitress secretly feeds a mute boy every day. One morning, helicopters land in front of her diner. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. It was a quiet morning in a small roadside diner just outside a forgotten town in upstate New York. The sky was pale gray, the kind that made the neon sign flicker brighter than usual against the window. Inside, the scent of coffee and butter filled the air while a jukebox hummed faintly in the corner. Behind the counter, Emma wiped down a stack of plates, her hands moving on instinct, though her eyes kept wandering toward the window. Every morning, around the same time, a small boy would appear. He could not have been more than 8 years old. His clothes were too thin for the chill, his shoes worn at the edges, and his eyes clear gray like smoke after rain carried something far older than his age. He never spoke, he never ordered. He just sat at the far booth near the window, watching the world in silence. At first, Emma thought he was shy. Then she realized he could not speak at all. The townspeople called him that mute kid, and walked past without a glance. But Emma could not ignore him. There was something fragile about the way he held his cup of water, like he was afraid it might vanish if he blinked. One cold Thursday morning, when the wind scraped against the glass, she noticed his hands shaking. The plate of pancakes someone had left behind was still warm. Without thinking, Emma slid it onto a small tray, added a cup of milk, and carried it to his table. "You look hungry," she said softly. "Here, this one is on the house." He looked up, startled, his lips parting but no sound coming out. Then, slowly, he nodded. His eyes glistened with something that looked like confusion mixed with gratitude. When he finished eating, he took a napkin and began to draw lines, circles, shapes that did not make sense until he turned it around. It was a small house, a tree beside it, and a woman with brown hair standing in the doorway. He slid the napkin toward her and smiled for the first time. Emma felt her chest tighten. "Is that me?" she whispered. The boy nodded again, shy but proud. Before she could ask his name, he was gone, slipping out the door into the wind, leaving the napkin behind. From that day on, she made sure to save a plate for him. Sometimes scrambled eggs, sometimes half a sandwich, sometimes just a cup of hot cocoa. He always came alone, always silent, but always left a small drawing in return. Once it was a bird. Another time, a sun over a hill. Each sketch found a home on the wall behind the counter, taped beside the daily specials. The regular customers teased her gently about her little artist, but Emma only smiled. Outside, the world went on indifferent and gray. Inside the diner, those drawings brought warmth to the walls. For a woman who worked double shifts to keep her sick mother's medicine paid, and the lights still running, the boy's quiet visits were the only moments that felt pure and uncalculated. On the 7th morning, something changed. The boy arrived earlier than usual, clutching a small piece of cloth in his hands. It was a handkerchief, embroidered with a golden bird spreading its wings. He placed it on the counter, pressed his palms together like a thank you, then ran off into the mist. Emma called after him, but he was already gone. She waited all day, hoping he would return. He did not. That night, she stood alone by the window, the lights from passing cars gliding across her tired reflection. The napkins on the wall fluttered softly in the air from the ceiling fan, and the golden bird shimmered faintly under the fluorescent light. Emma could not explain why she felt uneasy. Maybe it was the way the wind sounded outside like a warning carried over the hills. Maybe it was the silence that settled in after she turned the sign to "closed." Then, as the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, a deep rumble shook the windows. Cups rattled on the counter. The sound grew louder, mechanical, heavy, unfamiliar. Emma stepped outside, her apron still dusted with flour, and froze. Over the tree line, 3 black helicopters descended through the morning fog, blades slicing the air. The wind from them whipped her hair across her face. The ground vibrated beneath her feet as the nearest one touched down right in front of the diner. Doors swung open. Men in suits poured out, shouting orders into radios. The diner's sign flickered wildly behind her. And in that chaos, Emma's heart dropped to her knees when she heard someone yell, "The boy has been found, he is alive!" The next morning, the diner was quieter than usual. The smell of coffee and maple syrup lingered in the air, but the warmth felt thinner, like something vital had slipped away with the boy. Emma moved between tables with an empty ache she could not quite name. The napkin sketches were still taped to the wall, swaying faintly from the hum of the ceiling fan. Every time she passed them, her throat tightened. Outside, frost clung to the windows. The streets were half empty, and the snowplow had not yet come through. A couple of regulars sat at the counter sipping their coffee, talking about the helicopters from the day before. "Must have been something big," one of them said. "You do not see the FBI land out here every day." Emma pretended not to hear. She kept wiping the counter, forcing her hands to stay steady. When her shift ended, she pulled on her faded coat and stepped out into the cold. The air smelled like iron and snow. Her breath turned to mist as she walked home, a few blocks away through rows of run-down buildings. The neon sign of the diner flickered behind her until it disappeared completely. Her apartment sat above a closed laundromat. The hallway light had burned out months ago, and the stairs creaked under her weight. Inside, the room was small, a twin bed, a table, a chair, and a single heater that groaned like it was alive. On the counter, an envelope waited with a red stamp from the landlord. Rent overdue. Again. Emma dropped her bag and rubbed her face. She worked double shifts most weeks, but it was never enough. Her mother's hospital bills were still piled on the nightstand, next to a photo of the two of them from years ago. Her mother had been a nurse once, the kind who smiled even on the worst days. The illness had taken her voice first, then her job, and now her strength. Every dollar Emma earned went to keeping her mother's medicine coming on time. She ate whatever was left over from the diner, sometimes nothing at all. Yet, no matter how tight money became, she had never once regretted giving food to the boy. His drawings had reminded her why kindness still mattered. That night, as she sat on the edge of the bed, the television murmured in the background. A reporter's voice cut through the static. "Breaking news: Benjamin Whitmore, the missing son of billionaire Richard Whitmore, has been found alive this morning after nearly 6 months of disappearance. Authorities say he was discovered near a small roadside diner outside Albany. Details remain limited." Emma froze. The name sank into her chest like a stone. Benjamin Whitmore, the boy's gray eyes, the golden bird on the handkerchief, it all fit. She turned up the volume. Sources confirm the child was found malnourished but safe. An investigation is ongoing to determine how he survived and who may have been involved in his care. The phrase, "who may have been involved," sent a chill down her spine. She looked toward the window, where snowflakes pressed against the glass like tiny ghosts. Somewhere in the distance, sirens wailed. The next day, the diner was flooded with reporters. Cameras, microphones, and bright lights filled the small space that had once felt like her refuge. The owner, Mr. Clark, paced nervously. "Emma, what did you do?" he hissed under his breath. "I did nothing," she said quietly. "He was just a hungry child." "Well, congratulations," he snapped. "You fed the missing heir of a billionaire. Now my diner looks like a crime scene." By afternoon, she was told not to come back until things calmed down. That meant fired, though no one said the word. Emma walked home with her head down, snow soaking through her shoes. That evening, she found 2 men in dark coats waiting outside her apartment building. "Miss Emma Brooks?" one asked, flashing a badge. Her stomach clenched. "Yes? We would like to ask you a few questions about the Whitmore boy." She nodded, trembling. Inside, the apartment felt even smaller under their presence. They asked where she had met him, how long she had been feeding him, if she had known who he really was. "I did not," she repeated softly. "He never spoke. I thought he was homeless." The agents exchanged glances. One of them lowered his voice. "You understand, Miss Brooks, this is a high-profile case. Until we verify everything, we need you to stay in town." When they left, silence settled again. The heater clicked and rattled like it was trying to speak. Emma sat at the table staring at her hands. They smelled faintly of soap and flour, but she could still feel the warmth of the boy's small fingers when he had taken the plate from her. She pulled the handkerchief from her pocket and unfolded it. The golden bird glimmered under the weak light. In one corner, almost hidden in the stitching, were tiny letters, W-O-H. She traced them slowly with her thumb, whispering to herself, "Wings of Hope." Her mother had once mentioned that name, a charity run by the late Mrs. Whitmore, known for helping children in need. Emma's chest tightened. Maybe the boy's mother had made this handkerchief. Maybe it was the only thing he had left of her. She placed it gently beside the stack of medical bills and let out a shaky breath. The city outside buzzed with distant sirens, and the faint hum of news vans parked down the street. Somewhere, the world was celebrating that a rich man had found his son again. But in this tiny room above the laundromat, the woman who had kept that boy alive sat alone, wondering if doing the right thing would cost her everything she had left. 3 days passed before the world seemed to breathe again. Snow had melted into thin gray slush along the curbs, and the diner stood empty behind yellow tape. Emma had not returned to work. The town looked at her differently now, some with pity, others with suspicion. That morning, a letter arrived without a stamp. It was slipped under her apartment door, folded neatly in half. No sender's name, just a single line written in precise handwriting, "Come to the hospital." Her first thought was fear. Maybe they needed another statement. Maybe the police had changed their minds. Still, curiosity and a strange pull of responsibility pushed her out the door. The drive to St. Augustine Medical Center took nearly an hour on the old bus route. When she stepped off, the building loomed tall and white against the gray sky, surrounded by security officers and flashing cameras. Inside, the halls were polished, cold, and full of murmurs. She followed the signs until she reached the pediatric intensive care unit. Through the glass window, she saw him, Ben, the boy who had once sat quietly at her booth each morning. He was lying in a hospital bed, small beneath the crisp white sheets. Machines beeped softly around him, steady and rhythmic. His hair was cleaner now, trimmed neatly, and his cheeks had color again. But his eyes were open, staring blankly at the ceiling. Emma's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to rush in, to speak, to tell him she was there, but 2 security guards blocked the door. A tall man in a dark suit appeared behind them. His expression was unreadable. "Miss Brooks," he said. His voice was calm but heavy. "I am Richard Whitmore." The name alone made her spine stiffen. He was taller than she expected, his eyes sharp and tired, like a man who had not slept in weeks. "I believe you knew my son." I did not know who he was," Emma said quietly. "He came to my diner every morning. He never spoke. I only tried to help." Richard studied her for a long moment before speaking again. "He has not spoken since he came home. The doctors say the trauma runs deeper than they expected. But when he woke, he asked for one person. He drew your face." Emma stared through the glass again. Ben's small hand rested near a sketchbook lying open on the blanket. Inside was a faint pencil, drawing a diner window, a woman in an apron, and the word Emma scrawled at the bottom. Richard's voice softened slightly. "My security team told me you lost your job because of this. I am sorry for what the media has done. But I must ask, why did you help him? You could barely afford to feed yourself." She looked down at her hands. "Because no one else would." "Huh." For the first time, his expression shifted. Something like guilt flickered behind his eyes. "You should not have suffered for doing what is right." He reached into his coat and handed her a sealed envelope. "This is a gesture of gratitude, but I believe Ben would like to see you himself." Emma hesitated as the guard stepped aside. She walked into the room, her shoes squeaking softly against the floor. The smell of disinfectant filled the air. Ben turned his head slowly, his eyes meeting hers. "Hey there," she whispered, forcing a smile. "You remember me, don't you?" His fingers twitched. Then, without a sound, he reached for the sketchbook and turned to a blank page. With trembling hands, he drew a golden bird, the same emblem from the handkerchief. Beneath it, he wrote one shaky word: home. Emma's eyes burned. She knelt beside the bed, her hand resting over his. "You are home now, Ben." Outside the glass, Richard Whitmore watched silently. For the first time in months, his shoulders eased. But behind him, in the hallway, 2 men in suits whispered to each other, their voices low and urgent words like inheritance, trust, and heir, passing between them like shadows. Emma did not hear them. All she could see was the boy's faint smile and the fragile peace it brought back to her heart. The following week turned the hospital into a fortress of flashing lights and polished shoes. Every morning, reporters crowded outside the main gate, hoping for a glimpse of the Whitmore family. Inside, whispers followed Emma through the halls. Some staff smiled politely, but others stared with thinly veiled judgment, as if a waitress did not belong among millionaires. She visited Ben every day. Sometimes he was asleep, sometimes sketching quietly, his eyes still dim but no longer lifeless. She would sit beside him, reading stories or humming softly. The boy never spoke, but his small hand would reach for hers, and that was enough. One afternoon, as she left the room, Richard Whitmore was waiting by the door. His tie was loosened, his face drawn from exhaustion. "Miss Brooks," he said, "I wanted to thank you again. Ben sleeps better after you visit." Emma smiled faintly. "He is a good kid. He just needs to feel safe." "I hope one day he will," Richard murmured. "You have given him something I could not." He paused, then motioned for her to follow him into the hallway. They stopped near a row of tall windows overlooking the city. The winter sun spilled across the floor, pale and cold. "I would like to offer you something," he continued. "Our family foundation supports several child recovery programs. I want you to work with them, help us design one that reaches kids like Ben. You would be compensated, of course, and—" He hesitated. "It might help clear your name in the public eye." Emma blinked in surprise. "You want me to work for you?" "I want you to work with us," he said firmly. "You have a heart for this, Miss Brooks. I trust my son's instincts, and he trusts you." The words warmed her, but doubt still lingered. "I am not sure people like me fit in your world, Mr. Whitmore." Richard's tone softened. "Maybe my world needs more people like you." Before Emma could answer, a nurse hurried toward them. "Mr. Whitmore, you need to come. There is a problem with the boy's vitals." They rushed back to Ben's room. The heart monitor beeped rapidly. Doctors surrounded the bed, adjusting tubes and wires. Emma froze in the doorway, her chest tightening as memories of her mother's hospital nights flooded back. After several tense minutes, the rhythm steadied again. The lead doctor exhaled. "He is stable. Just a panic episode. It happens after trauma." Richard rubbed a hand over his face, his voice trembling. "I cannot lose him again." Emma stepped closer, speaking softly. "He needs calm, not more fear." The doctor nodded. "She is right. The boy responds better to her presence. For now, Miss Brooks, please stay with him while we monitor." Richard looked at her, then simply said, "Thank you." Hours passed. The machines hummed steadily, and snow began to fall outside the window again. Emma sat by Ben's side, humming an old tune her mother used to sing. Slowly, his breathing evened out. When she finally left the room that night, the hospital corridors were nearly empty. Her footsteps echoed against the polished tiles. As she reached the lobby, two men in suits stepped out of the shadows. She recognized one from earlier, the man who had whispered about inheritance. "Miss Brooks," he said with a courteous smile that did not reach his eyes. "A word, if you do not mind." "Oh, I am tired," she said quietly. "It can wait." "I am afraid it cannot." The man's tone sharpened. "You are close to Mr. Whitmore and his son. That makes you important." Emma frowned. "Important for what?" "For understanding boundaries," he said smoothly. "You have done a noble thing, feeding the boy. But let us be clear. You do not belong in their story. You are not family, and you never will be." His companion leaned closer. "Do yourself a favor. Take whatever compensation the Whitmores offer and disappear quietly. People like us tend to protect our own." Emma's stomach turned. "Is that a threat?" "It is advice," the man said, stepping aside. "Good evening, Miss Brooks." She walked past them, her pulse racing. Outside, the cold hit her face like a slap. Snowflakes melted against her cheeks, but she barely felt them. At the bus stop, she clutched the handkerchief in her pocket. The golden bird glimmered faintly under the streetlight. For the first time, she wondered if her kindness had pulled her into something much larger and much darker than she ever imagined. Behind her, through the hospital windows high above, she thought she saw a shadow move, a tall figure watching her leave. But when she turned, it was gone, swallowed by the falling snow. The next morning, sunlight slipped through the blinds of the hospital window, soft but cold. Emma arrived early, carrying a small paper bag with fresh muffins from the corner bakery. She had barely slept, her mind replaying the words of the men who confronted her the night before. Inside Ben's room, the boy was awake, sitting upright with a blanket tucked around him. His small hands were busy with a box of crayons, drawing quietly on a fresh sheet of paper. When he saw Emma, his eyes lit up for a moment, and that tiny spark made every sleepless hour worth it. "Good morning," she said softly, setting the muffins on the table. "You are looking better today." He did not answer, but he reached for a brown crayon and drew a small bird flying toward the sundae. When he finished, he handed it to her. Beneath the drawing, in shaky letters, he had written one word, hope. Emma smiled. "That is a beautiful word, Ben." Richard Whitmore entered the room a moment later. He looked more rested than the day before, though the lines around his eyes had deepened. "He has been waiting for you," he said quietly. "Every morning he asks for Emma before breakfast." "I am just trying to make him smile," she replied. "You have done more than that," Richard said, his tone warm but tinged with something deeper. "You reminded him that kindness still exists." Before she could respond, the door burst open. A man in an expensive gray suit stepped inside without knocking. His face was sharp, his movements too smooth to be friendly. Richard's expression hardened immediately. "Ethan," he said under his breath. "Brother," the man greeted coolly. "I heard the miracle child is awake. I had to see it myself." Emma stepped back instinctively. She had seen this man once before in the hallway, whispering about inheritance. Richard's jaw tightened. "This is not the time." Ethan ignored him and walked to Ben's bedside, his smile thin. "Hello, nephew. You have caused quite the media storm." Ben looked away, clutching Emma's hand. The monitor beeped faster. "Please," she said quietly. "He does not like strangers." Ethan's gaze flicked toward her, sharp as glass. "And who might you be?" "Emma Brooks," Richard answered firmly. "She is a friend to my son." "A friend," Ethan repeated, the word dripping with disdain. "Interesting how quickly you replace people, Richard. First your wife, now a waitress." "That is enough," Richard snapped. "Leave." Ethan's smirk widened. "Do not forget who keeps the board under control. The family name does not survive on charity." He turned and left as suddenly as he had arrived, leaving the air heavy and sour. Richard exhaled slowly. "I am sorry you had to see that." Emma shook her head. "He seems angry." "He always has been," Richard said. "He believes he should have inherited everything. But my wife built this company with me. When she passed, Ethan wanted control. My son is the legal heir, and that has never sat well with him." Emma's eyes drifted to Ben, who had gone quiet again, his drawing crumpled in his lap. She knelt beside him. "It is all right, sweetheart. You are safe." Richard looked at her then, really looked, as if seeing past the uniform and the exhaustion to something stronger underneath. "You have a gift," he said softly. "You see people for who they are, not what they have." Emma swallowed the lump in her throat. "It is easier that way. Money can blind people to what matters." He nodded slowly. "Perhaps that is why my son trusts you." A nurse entered to check the monitors. And the moment broke. Emma stepped out into the hallway, needing air. The corridor was quiet, except for the hum of machines and distant footsteps. As she passed a waiting area, she overheard two staff members whispering. "The police are reopening the kidnapping file," one said. "They think it might have been an inside job." Emma froze. Her heart began to race. Inside job. The phrase echoed in her head. She turned toward Ben's room just in time to see Ethan walking briskly down the opposite hallway, talking into his phone. His voice was low but urgent. Something inside her told her this was not over. The danger that had taken the boy months ago might still be circling, hidden behind smiles and family names. And for reasons she could not explain, Emma knew she was now part of it too. That night, the wind outside the hospital howled against the glass like a warning. Emma sat in the small waiting room, her hands wrapped around a cup of lukewarm coffee she had not touched. Every sound in the corridor made her flinch: the shuffle of nurses, the distant beep of a monitor, the low hum of the elevator. Something in her chest refused to calm. Inside Ben's room, the boy was finally sleeping. Richard had left an hour earlier after a tense phone call, promising to return in the morning. Emma had volunteered to stay through the night. She told herself it was for Ben, but deep down, she did not trust the peace that had settled over the place. Around midnight, footsteps echoed down the hallway, too slow, too deliberate. Emma rose from her chair and peeked through the small glass window of the door. A man in a gray uniform walked past, head down, a clipboard in hand. She almost sat back down until she noticed something. The man's badge was blank. Her pulse quickened. She slipped into the corridor. "Excuse me," she called softly. The man turned. For a brief second, his expression froze, then he bolted. Emma's voice caught in her throat. She ran after him, her shoes slapping the tile floor. The hallway lights flickered as he rounded the corner toward the back stairwell. "Stop!" she shouted, but he was already gone. Security arrived moments later, alerted by the noise. They searched the stairwell and surrounding halls but found nothing. No ID, no record of an orderly scheduled on that floor. The chief of security frowned deeply. "We will review the cameras," he said. "You did the right thing, Miss Brooks." But Emma did not feel right. When she returned to Ben's room, she noticed his window slightly open. The cold air seeped in through the narrow gap, and her hands shook as she closed it. She leaned down, brushing a strand of hair from the boy's forehead. "You are safe," she whispered, though the words trembled on her lips. The next morning brought no relief. Reporters outside shouted questions as Richard arrived with his lawyer. "What happened last night?" he demanded. Emma told him everything: the uniform, the chase, the blank badge. His jaw tightened. It was not a random intruder. Someone inside knew our security patterns. He turned to his lawyer. "Shut down all access to this floor. I want every visitor and staff member checked, and I want my brother kept away until further notice." Ethan appeared only hours later, furious. "You cannot keep me out, Richard. I am family." "Family does not hire strangers to scare a child," Richard snapped. Ethan's face reddened. "You think I had something to do with this? You are paranoid." Emma stood silently in the corner. The air between the brothers charged like a storm. "Leave," Richard said through gritted teeth, "before I make sure you are escorted out." Ethan glared at Emma before turning sharply and storming down the hall. The lawyer whispered something to Richard, and for the first time, his composure faltered. He pressed a hand to his forehead. "I thought bringing Ben home would end this nightmare," he said quietly. "But it is only getting worse." Emma touched his arm gently. "We will keep him safe. You have my word." "Oh." He looked at her then, exhaustion softening into something close to trust. "You already have." Later that evening, Emma sat beside Ben's bed once more. The golden light of sunset filtered through the blinds, painting the room in gentle amber. Ben stirred, his eyelids fluttering. When he opened his eyes, he whispered something, his first real word since he had been found. "Run." Emma froze. "What did you say?" He repeated it, a little louder this time. "Run." Her breath caught as the overhead lights flickered again, and somewhere down the hall, an alarm began to sound. The alarm echoed through the corridor like a siren in a nightmare. Emma's heart pounded as red lights flashed along the walls. Nurses rushed past, shouting orders. Somewhere down the hall, doors slammed, and security radios crackled with static. She turned back to Ben's bed. The boy was sitting up, his eyes wide with fear. "Run," he whispered again, clutching her sleeve. "Run from what?" she asked, her voice shaking. Before he could answer, the power flickered. For one long moment, the room plunged into darkness. Emma grabbed the emergency flashlight from the wall and flicked it on. The beam cut through the dark and landed on a shadow, moving outside the glass window of the door. "Stay down," she whispered. She pulled the rolling tray in front of the bed as makeshift cover and reached for the call button. Static filled the intercom, but no voice replied. The door handle began to turn. Emma's breath caught. Then, as suddenly as it started, the light snapped back on and 2 guards burst in. "Miss Brooks, are you all right?" She nodded, though her knees felt weak. Someone was out there. One of the guards scanned the hallway. "We found an unauthorized badge in the stairwell. Whoever it was, they are gone now." Richard arrived minutes later, breathless and furious. "What happened?" Emma explained everything. Ben stayed silent, his hands gripping the blanket. When she finished, Richard turned toward his head of security. "I want every access log checked. If Ethan's name shows up anywhere near this floor, I want him arrested." The guard hesitated, "Sir, there is something else. The surveillance footage from last night and tonight, it is missing. Entire hours erased." Richard's face went pale. "Erased? By whom?" "We do not know yet." Emma looked between them. "This is not just about money, is it? Someone wanted Ben gone." Richard met her gaze, the truth dawning like a weight between them. "My brother controls part of the company's insurance trust. If Ben were to disappear, everything reverts to him." A chill spread through Emma's chest. "He tried once. He will try again." Richard straightened. "Not if I expose him first." Hours later, after security tightened around the hospital, Emma finally sat by Ben's bed again. The boy was asleep, his small hand still clutching hers. She watched his chest rise and fall and whispered, "You are safe now, I promise." But even as she said it, her eyes drifted to the dark window. Outside, far below in the parking lot, a single car idled with its headlights off. For the first time, Emma realized kindness alone would not be enough. To protect the child she loved like her own, she would need courage more than she had ever known. By morning, the storm had passed, but the tension inside the hospital had not. Richard met Emma in the cafeteria, his expression hard with determination. "It is time we stop reacting," he said quietly. "We go on the record." "You mean tell the press?" Emma asked. He nodded. "Ethan has been manipulating the story from behind the scenes. If we do nothing, he wins. But if the public hears the truth from us, his power will crumble." Emma hesitated. "And Ben? He should not be dragged into this." "Oh, that is why you must be there," Richard replied. "You are the only one he trusts. You represent what saved him decency, not wealth." Later that afternoon, a press conference was arranged in the hospital's main atrium. Reporters filled every corner, cameras flashing. Emma stood at the edge of the podium, her palms sweating. Beside her, Ben clutched her hand, hiding behind her coat. Richard stepped to the microphone. "My son is alive today because of one person," he began. "A woman who had nothing but chose kindness over comfort. When my family's wealth could not protect my child, her humanity did." He gestured toward Emma. "Miss Emma Brooks." The room erupted in flashes and murmurs. Emma took a shaky step forward. She had never spoken in front of a crowd, but when she looked down at Ben, courage settled in her chest. "I did not do this for praise," she said softly. "I did it because no child should ever eat alone. Sometimes the smallest act of kindness can reach farther than we imagine." As she spoke, she noticed movement at the back of the room. Ethan, standing near the exit, his face twisted with restrained fury. He whispered something to the man beside him and turned to leave. Richard's security detail intercepted him halfway. A uniformed officer approached, holding a warrant. "Ethan Whitmore, you are under arrest for conspiracy and obstruction of justice." The room gasped. Ethan's composure broke for the first time. "You cannot prove anything," he shouted. "We already have," the officer said. "Your financial transfers and deleted surveillance footage lead directly to you." He struggled briefly before being led away, his words dissolving under the noise of cameras clicking. When it was over, Richard exhaled slowly. "It is done," he whispered. But Emma's attention was on Ben. The boy was drawing again, sketching a small bird taking flight above the crowd. He looked up at her and smiled, faint but genuine. She knelt beside him. "That is beautiful," she said. He whispered his second word since the rescue. "Free." Emma's eyes filled with tears. For the first time in months, she felt the weight lift. Justice had found its way, and kindness had not been in vain. Outside the hospital, snow began to fall again, soft and forgiving, covering the city in quiet light. 1 year later, the diner lights glowed again under a golden autumn sky. The windows were clean, the booths freshly painted, and a small wooden sign hung by the door. "Meals of Hope. Every child eats free." Emma stood behind the counter in a new apron, her hair tied back the same way it had been the first day Ben walked into her life. The place was busy now. Families filled the tables, volunteers in matching shirts served meals, and laughter carried through the room. A framed drawing hung on the wall above the register, a golden bird flying toward the sun, signed in small, uneven letters. Ben. Outside, a black car pulled up to the curb. Richard stepped out, dressed simply, no longer surrounded by guards or flashing cameras. Beside him, Ben ran ahead, waving a small bouquet of daisies. "Miss Emma!" he called, his voice bright and sure. It was still soft but no longer trembling. Emma crouched down as he threw his arms around her. "Look at you," she said, smiling through tears. "You are growing so fast." Richard watched them with quiet pride. "He insisted on picking those himself," he said. "He wanted to thank you for the opening." She looked around the diner, her voice thick with emotion. "You made all of this possible." "No," Richard said gently. "You did. This is your dream, not mine. You turned a simple act of kindness into a movement." Ben tugged her sleeve. "Daddy says you are family now." Emma laughed softly, wiping a tear. Richard smiled and reached into his pocket. He handed her a small velvet box. Inside was a simple silver ring engraved with a tiny bird. "I do not know what I can offer that equals what you gave us," he said quietly. "But if you will have me, I would like to spend the rest of my life making sure you never have to face another storm alone." The room went silent for a heartbeat, then applause rose like a wave around them. Emma's eyes shimmered. She nodded once, unable to speak. Outside, the golden bird on the diner sign swayed in the wind, catching the last light of sunset. And for the first time in a very long time, everything felt complete justice, love, and the simple truth that one small act of kindness could change the course of a life forever.